Okay, good evening everybody, and I'd like to welcome you all to Fitzwilliam College Debating Society. Now, as you all know, the motion before us tonight is whether meat is murder, and it goes without saying that this is an issue of great controversy, and this is of course why we've decided to make it the opening debate of our programme this Lent term. On behalf of the committee, I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time to come to this debate, and a special thank you to our external debater, Joey, for giving up his time to come. And Joey's a well-known animal liberation and vegan activist with a YouTube channel that currently has in excess of 79,000 subscribers. So just before we get into it, we'll briefly just recap the rules of the structure of the debate that we use here at Fitz. So all speakers will have 7 minutes to speak with no interruptions from the audience. After 6 minutes, I will knock just to signal that the speaker has 1 minute left to complete their speech. And after each speech, I will briefly open the floor up to both the audience and people on the panel to ask questions on that speech that they've just heard. And then following the speeches from all four speakers, we'll open up the floor more generally for a Q&A directed to all speakers. And then at the end, we'll take a final vote on the motion. So before we start, I'd just like to take an initial vote and try and gauge kind of opinion in the room. So you have the option to abstain if you wish. So could all those who support the motion, meat is murder, raise your hand? Okay, I'm just going to say that's 90% of the room.
Yeah, it's pretty split house, I think.
Okay, we've got 80 to 90% of the room. And then could all those opposed now raise your hand? Okay, so that's 10. And any abstentions? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so we've got about 7 there. Okay, now I'll introduce our first speaker tonight, who's William Phelps, chairman of KUKA and exotic meats officer for the Monday Steak Club, a campaign, a society to end meat-free Mondays in Churchill College. Please give him a round of applause.
No, thank you very much. I just thought that before we sort of launch into the wider questions and implications that are raised by the motion at hand, we need to cut through some, I'd say, intellectual dishonesty, which surrounds the whole motion and debate as to whether meat is murder. What we commonly hear surrounding the whole meat is murder, and indeed just the wider vegan discussion, are points made about free lifestyle choices, the environment, animal welfare, and the capacity for animal sentience, and so on and so forth. Now, what I will say very openly and very freely is that these all hold individual merit, and I think they can all be discussed individually, and I would argue all constitute quite a separate discussion. But separate to those, and I'd say obviously, well, indeed, it's what we're discussing this evening, we need to ask ourselves, is meat murder? Not merely immoral, not merely something to be prevented, to be cut down on, to be, say, reviewed, but is it murder? Now, the first question is, well, what do we mean by murder? It's a term which is commonly employed. You know, we always have the slogan, meat is murder, the T-shirts, meat is murder, and so on and so forth. But what do we really mean when we say murder? Now, in a very basic sense, now, forgive me, I've used the OED, not the Superior Cambridge English Dictionary, which says that murder is unlawful, premeditated killing of one human being to another. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why is it that the dictionary and indeed the legal definition says one human being to another? And the reason I would say is one which underpins society as we know it, civil society, civil democracy, is that society is something you participate in. You take things from society, you receive certain rights. You receive legislative protection from murder, for example, as we've just shown, and you give certain things in return, such as tax. And all of this is underscored by a basic belief in equality before law. And this is the crux of the argument. It's about equality, right? So all of these discussions of meat, is it environmentally friendly? What about animal welfare? What about the sentience of animals? They, I would say, dodge the point slightly, because it's radical equality is really what we're talking about here this evening. And in order to propose that meat is murder, therefore, you need to say that there is radical equality and we must have radical equality, and that actually we should reduce the status of the human to that of the animal, and we must compare the animal and the human on equal footing and on equal terms. They are completely equal, and we must therefore afford them equal rights. Because murder, if we are to judge it in the social sense, we must therefore be legal about it, and we must say that in order to, if I were to kill a human, it's murder, and if I were to kill an animal, it's murder. We must grant equality. But to any person of sound mind, I would say that this, I think, is ridiculous. I mean, on the one hand, we have the implications of such a view. If we're going to afford legal equality to animals, I mean, what other social equalities must you afford them? Should animals pay tax? Should they be able to vote? Should they indeed go to prison and be able to own property? And you may laugh, you may say, oh, this is reductionist. But really, this is the sort of logic you open yourself up to when you use such extreme terms such as murder. When you say, to eat meat is murder. Because that is really what lies at the core of the issue. And furthermore, if I were to hit a rabbit with my car, should I go to prison for manslaughter? If I were to go rabbiting, for example, as any rural man is wont to do, should I be tried for murder? If we introduce this idea that meat is murder and that animals are radically equal in America, should I face the death penalty for shooting a rabbit? And again, I think to most people of sound mind, the answer is no. And why is that? I'd say on the one hand, it's because as humans, as sort of brethren in species, we know that there is a certain quality to us that is, I would argue, more complex. That is a certain set of emotions, of desires, and a worldview which animals simply don't have. We are a separate species. And I think taking this into account, combined with the very troubling implications of such radical absolutism, the view that, for example, the death of an infant child is to be held equal to the death of a goat, raises serious questions. So what I would argue at its core is, I'm not going to criticise the vegan choice. I'm not going to criticise concerns for animal welfare, concerns about the environment, concerns about the harmful health effects of meat. They're all completely valid and I think deserve discussion. But to suggest that meat is murder, and to take the implications of that and say, well, look, we should afford radical equality to animals, is simply not a sustainable view to take. The implications are dangerous, and I would argue it actually denigrates both the status of man and animals in society. So I would fully support and encourage concern about animal welfare, concern about animal rights, concern about the environment and about health. But declaring meat as murder, I would say, is not the right way to do it. And for that reason, I would urge you to oppose the motion. Thank you.
I will briefly take a few questions from the audience. There, Eric at the back.
So at one point, you suggested that you asked rhetorically, should we give animals voting rights? Should we send them to prison? So I think we'd all agree that the killing of, say, a 1-year-old child would be murder. But we don't give babies the responsibilities of citizens. We don't send them to prison. We don't ask them to vote. There's no reason that respect for something for a right to life implies responsibility as a citizen.
No, I think that's obviously a valid point. I'll stand back up.
It's an odd comparison to make.
No, but it's a valid one nonetheless. And what I would say is that, do we believe that babies have the same capabilities and abilities that an adult man has? Would we trust a baby to vote? Would we trust a baby to drive a car? Would we trust a baby to carry firearms? The answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is not because we believe that babies are inferior or of a completely lower status. It's because we recognise that we are different as grown people, different to them. In the same way that I would argue we must recognise, in virtue of being humans, that we are different to animals and therefore must treat them differently, not in a notion of radical equality.
I've got a question. What is that difference? What is the morally significant difference between an infant baby and a lamb, like you suggested, that gives us justification to stab a lamb in the neck with a knife, take their life from them, and for some reason killing that baby child, that human child, would be considered murder? But there must be some morally significant difference as to why it's not considered murder to take the life of that lamb.
Now, the whole moral discussion, it's a big one, and I think we could go on at length. But what I would ask in return, and I think this sums up the issue, is you must ask yourself, would you feel as comfortable killing an infant child as you would a goat?
Well,
to
I don't
which the
think you
answer I
asked
would
him-
hope is
Sorry,
I
it
think
is
it
question
is
and
question.
answer.
Okay.
So there will be
Yeah.
other people want to
There'll be an
ask
option at the end. For,
Okay.
to which the answer I would hope is no.
Okay.
Now, I mean, I try not to be intuitive and intuitionist when it comes to morality, but I think the fact there is that block in the first place suggests that there is something of a hierarchy of treatment.
I mean, it's difficult in what you say, because if you take like the massacre in Rwanda and things like that, I wasn't there, so I didn't experience. But it became very easy for a human to kill another human because they weren't of the right type. And it sounds, a lot of what you say is I could imagine a slave master talking about why those group of people don't have any rights, even though they were human beings, they were different and rightless. And it just seems that, okay, that was then, but we're now, and we do understand that there are beings that can experience joy and happiness and a sense of freedom, the desire to be a parent to the lamb or whatever, or, you know, or the lamb to dance, you know. So it's very subjective, your view. You know, you have your cultural belief that it's okay. You were brought up that it's okay to have killed animal on your plate. I was brought up that way. But as you become aware, then of course your morality can change, because it's an awareness, it's a subjective point of view.
No, of course. No, I think cultural relativism will always play a part in these discussions. But equally, if you're arguing that morality is completely subjective, you could say, well, maybe tomorrow or in 100 years' time, our morality will shift to the point where we're slaughtering 10 times the animals we need, and we are effectively employing the meat industry on steroids. I think that relativism is it's not a. I wouldn't use it as a base to contravene what I'm saying as such. But I think in response to the idea that maybe animals do have this sentience which we don't appreciate, I think that's fair enough. But in virtue of having sort of a being brethren in species and appreciating our wants and our needs, and indeed not just the needs of those in the West, but the needs of those in the East as well, who are poorer societies, can't afford the replacements that are often espoused, sort of different types of milk and so forth. We do need to take into account, I would say, that there are certain arbitrary lines that need to be drawn, that there are certain things we can do, or indeed should be able to do to animals. And I think perhaps then it becomes more an issue of how do we treat the animals and how do we take them through that process. But obviously, no, it's a valid point.
Okay, we'll take one more question from the audience, then we'll move on. Joe at the back.
So, presumably your argument for saying that killing a human is murder and killing an animal isn't, presumably resting on some kind of difference in properties between those two things, meaning that in one case the killing begets murder and the other the killing doesn't beget murder. And I don't think it doesn't seem like you've quite outlined what exactly that difference is.
Sounds like it's you. I think we need to appreciate what murder is and what the law is and what these terms are. They are legislative properties which are imparted by a society encoding them into law. And so in order for me to commit murder or to steal something, we need to have certain legal beliefs. And as I sort of outlined very roughly, admittedly, and I'm sure any HSPS student will tear me to pieces for it, is effectively the view of how society works, and that society is by participation, and with that you receive certain protections. And so I would say for that reason, I can murder a human, but I cannot murder an animal, because that sort of legal franchisement, that legal protection is not extended to animals. And the only way it could be is by granting them the sort of equality and the sort of recognition, which, as I proved, is actually very, very dangerous. And so if you do respect the right of humans and animals as different, and having different needs and different properties and different wants and so on and so forth, you cannot therefore classify it as murder.
Okay. Unfortunately, we'll have to move on. If you have any further questions, you can, of course, ask them at the end. Now, that being said, I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Louise Harris, who's a third-year student here at FITS.
Okay, so is meat murder? The Oxford Dictionary definition, as Will has just said, is the unlawful, premeditated killing of one human being by another. Clearly, if we were to use this definition, meat wouldn't be murder, because meat, in the context of this debate, is the flesh of a non-human animal. But the question is, why is murder wrong? What is it about murder that's morally wrong? It's the deliberate and needless taking of a sentient being's life against its will. So, that will be the definition I use today, and I'll be showing you how meat fulfills every one of those categories. It's needless, it's the deliberate killing of a sentient being and against their will. So, point 1. Meat is murder because non-human animals who are killed for their meat are sentient. Sentience is the capacity to feel, perceive, or experience subjectively. So that involves feeling pain, emotions, having awareness of your surroundings, and so on. There is consensus amongst scientists that non-human animals have sentience. In 2012, an international group of prominent scientists signed the Cambridge, so right here, Declaration on Consciousness, in which they proclaimed their support for the idea that animals are conscious and aware to the degree that humans are, the same degree. And that list of animals was all mammals, birds, and even the octopus. So, and they also acknowledged that consciousness can emerge in animals which are actually very unlike humans, including those that evolved from, different evolutionary tracks. So therefore, we are not unique in possessing neurological substrates that generate consciousness. So, if non-human animals are conscious, they're sentient, just like us, what's the difference between taking their life and taking our life? As you said, you wanted to separate animal sentience from this discussion, but if a human wasn't sentient, then would we consider it murder? Sentience is kind of key to this debate. So some examples of sentience for non-human farm animals who are killed for their meat. So sheep can recognise up to 50 other sheep's faces, remember it for 2 years. Cows show excitement when they discover how to open a gate leading to a food reward. Lame meat chickens choose to eat food which contains a painkiller. They feel pain, emotions, perceive, and are aware. They experience subjectively. And it can be argued, so it's not just murder, meat, taking the life of a sentient being, but it's worse, because the meat industry is a lifelong suffering for these animals. And that's because, generally, factory farming accounts for the vast majority of global meat production. For example, just in the US, factory farms raise 99.9% of chickens for meat. So, in factory farms, these animals are confined in tiny enclosures or cages. Chickens, for example, have less than an A4 page amount of space. They can't move. They're pumped with hormones and antibiotics. Chickens have their beaks trimmed without anaesthetic at day 1 of age. Many attack each other or eat each other due to the stress of being kept in confined conditions. And even the process of slaughter can involve suffering. So, for example, gas chambers. These are in the UK, Australia, multiple countries. Footage shows pigs screaming and thrashing as they gasp for air inside the gas chambers in an Australian, the biggest pig abattoir in Australia. That was video footage. And constantly, people who go into factory farms to film the slaughtering process have found that actually the law, which you say is so important, has been broken in so many cases. Animals are being kicked, slapped, stamped on, improperly stunned, and many of them actually aren't sufficiently stunned, so they are conscious when they are killed. So, as you say, they will be hacked in the throat whilst they're conscious. So it's not just murder, it's not just death, but it's also lifelong suffering, and because they are sentient, it means it's wrong. Point 2, so even if the animal, let's say, is stunned sufficiently, so they're unconscious when they're killed, the idea that this is somehow humane is ludicrous. What's humane about ending a sentient being's life against their will when they want to survive? Do they not have a right to life? Well, let's take a dog. We love dogs. Who here has liked the Facebook page Dog Spotting? Raise your hands if you have. Okay. And who's liked cow spotting or pig spotting? Okay. So even a small number of people, there's still a difference. Why is there a difference? That's because how we view them. Cows and pigs and sheep, then maybe not as cute or fluffy. They're not publicised in the media as being funny or smart because we are conditioned to believe they're products, not individuals with identities. But research shows, again, they're not just as sentient. Pigs are smarter than 3-year-old humans. They can play video games. They're just as smart as your cat or dog. But they taste good. Let's say your dead dog tastes like chicken. Would you eat it? Probably not, right? People in the UK will sign petitions against the dog meat trade in China. But research reveals that one of the reasons is because we see pets to have complex minds like us. And once we are made aware through education that farm animals have these complex minds, have sentience, then what is the difference? Why is killing a dog murder in most people's view in Western society, and why is killing a farm animal not murder? So I don't see the difference there. Okay, point 3, meat is murder because the killing of animals for meat is needless in most of current society. So if, some people try and compare our meat consumption to a lion hunting, there's, not just one difference there, but one main one is that a lion's body is designed for meat. They're a carnivore. They don't have digestive systems to digest plant food, but we do. If they don't hunt that meat for survival, they will die. We will not. in our case, it's not a matter of whether we need meat, it's more greed. We do it because it tastes good, it's traditional culture. I'm not saying that everyone in the world, in every situation, it is murder. You know, if there's someone in a rural village in a third world country, they have the only food source available to them is meat, or that's their only way to survive, then can you see it as needless? So, but when we're looking at the context of meat in our society, the majority of meat consumption is by first world countries, and we simply just do not need meat to survive. It's a luxury. If we wouldn't support ivory trade or trophy hunting, which are fun activities or luxury products, why would we support the meat trade? And finally, you made the point that clearly murder is to do with humans, and meat isn't just the murder of farm animals, but also humans. This is because the meat industry can be seen to perpetuate world hunger. So recent studies have shown that we already grow enough edible crops to feed not only the current human population, but the one projected for 2050. But that requires us to go vegan. That's because the plants that we're growing are going, 34% of those are going to animals. They could be going to humans, and they wouldn't be starving and dying. So it's murder for us as well. Thank you.
Okay, so firstly, any questions from the audience? There, just a hand at the back there.
Yes, I would just like to ask, if you are opposed to the killing of sentient creatures when, it's not necessary, for example, to save someone's life, what's your opinion on abortion when the woman's life is not in danger?
When the woman's life is not in danger?
Yeah.
Okay, but I see the similarities you're making, because it's the taking of a life of a sentient being, but here it's a lot more complex issue. If that woman, isn't ready to have a child or can't, there's a lot of complex issues there. It's interfering with her own well-being, and whereas whether you're eating meat or not is not going to interfere with your life in any actually tangible manner. So it's clearly needless.
No, I'm just slightly curious as to the way you're addressing murder, because you said that if there was a villager in an underdeveloped country who ate meat, that wouldn't be murder, and that murder is apparently now defined as needless waste. Surely that firstly doesn't accord with the definition you gave at the beginning, and secondly is just you saying this is murder, and therefore I'm going to classify needless waste but not an underdeveloped nation's village consuming meat as murder, because if you want to be logically consistent, shouldn't you say that all meat consumption is therefore murder, because animals should therefore be equal?
Well, my definition is that it is meat is murder because it is needless, right? So to me, if two humans are in a desert island, and in order for one of them to survive, they have to kill the other. To me, that just isn't murder, because it's not. Okay. They're doing it out of a need to survive. You might define that differently.
I've got a different view on that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's... I think there's more of a reason, but I don't think it's morally justified. If you and I were on a desert island and I killed you to survive, I didn't need to do that. I mean, we're both as sentient as each other, and we both have, I think that's still murder, personally. And I don't think that I don't think it's always murder for me. I think it's to be consistent across the board. Animal products in third world countries are a luxury. So to say rice is less accessible than, a sheep, maybe some hunting scenario, but for me, it's not moral. They might have more of a reason, more of a justification there than you do over here, but yeah.
Okay, any further questions before we move on? Yeah, Louise?
We're talking about meat as when we kill, for example, sheep or, cattle, but what's your take on insects, for example? If we eat an insect, is that murder? Is that meat?
So scientific research on sentience is consensus about the sentience of mammals and birds. As far as I'm aware, the research on insects is inconclusive. But I mean, in my view, it's always best to give the benefit of the doubt. If you don't know if something's sentient, you should prioritize trying to avoid eating what's kind of most sentient or is sentient.
Okay. I'd like to introduce the second speaker for the opposition, Patrick Nutton, third-year student here at FITS and also president of the Debating Society.
Hello everyone. It is a pleasure to be here tonight, honestly. To see so many of you here at an event, yeah, it's great. And I'd like to thank everyone who's made tonight possible. Now, in all honesty, my position in this debate is far closer to Joey and Louise than it is to my partner, and I hope that he has appealed to those of you in this room who share his views, but I do not. I think that the meat industry, as it is murderous. And I agree with everything that Louise has said on the horrors of the meat industry, as she has called out battery farming, etc. But my speech is not here to argue with that. I'm going to be explaining how meat and the direction it is going actually is moving from being murderous to not murderous, and is the way to move forward into a future where meat isn't murder. The most effective way to do that is to vote that meat isn't murder. And that's for one very simple reason. We live in an age of developing technology where cultured meat is becoming cheaper and more productive by the year. The first cultured hamburger was produced in 2013, and over the last few years it has become a cheaper and more available food source. It is still a luxury product, but if the history has taught us anything, it is that technologies get cheaper, they get faster, they get more effective. So, let me be clear. The meat industry as it is murderous. But the future of meat and the direction it is going disconnects the product of meat from an act where you must kill a being. This is a huge disconnect in the argument, where the meat industry as it is now is murderous, but the future of meat is not. Now, there are plenty of you here who are very aware of the horrors of the meat industry. I'm sure that the opening vote has made that very clear alongside the arguments of Louise and Joey. But there are plenty more who are not at this debate, and people like my partner who will never be convinced by the argument of go vegan, who will retain eating meat to the day they die out of stubbornness. I'm sure those of you who are involved in vegan organisations are aware of these people and have come across them, right? What is the way to win them over? What is the way to convince those people to stop murdering animals? It is to transform meat itself. It is to change the underpinnings of their debate and to move meat away from when it is murderous to when it is not, through changing technology and a transforming world. Therefore, I urge you that when you leave here tonight, you argue that meat is not murder, not just because, you know, meat tastes nice or they're not really human or battery farming doesn't matter because, you know, they're chickens or whatever. I urge you, argue that meat isn't murder because of a changing world which disconnects meat from the killing of a sentient being, and that means that we can convince those who are never going to stop eating meat that they do not have to kill to get their fix. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Okay, any questions? Right, we'll go with the gentleman at the back.
Firstly, I'm just wondering what exactly is the definition of meat?
So meat is using regenerative in the sort of the lab growth is using regenerative techniques similar to stem cell research to grow exactly the same compounds as you would get in a live animal in a lab. So the process of it is actually incredibly similar to the process of vertical farming, in that you grow in a lab or in a factory using scientific methods a product that does not involve a live animal that is ever sentient. So I think that falls quite clearly under the definition of meat. Do you agree?
It's about animal-based cells.
Sorry, it's one at a time, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and he will call you one by one.
Okay, we'll go with the lady at the back.
How many people here have had cured or cultured meat? Because as far as I'm aware, like the most of the meat here is all animal slaughter.
Yes.
So I agree.
Yeah.
If we are moving forward to growing it in the lab,
Yes.
time I think meat is murder.
Okay.
So I was just curious if, like, maybe you yourself have had lab
I've not, but it is growing, and it's one of those kind of weird, trendy, niche restaurant things. But what I would say is the reason that I would agree with you that the majority of meat as it is now is murder. But let's not sell the principle, because once we sell the principle, it's much harder to convince the people who are never going to convert, right? I'd say that if you want, let's keep the debate open. Let's say that meat isn't murder, when there is a technology which we can pursue to win over meat eaters to a product which doesn't harm animals. Does that sound like a fair response to you?
It does, but that's like in the future. It's just right now, what we can do right now is to...
What we can do right now and what is happening right now are different. So cultured meat exists, and it separates the principles of meat being murder versus the majority of what is happening. So there are clear examples in the world today where meat isn't murder. So the principle is kind of hard to sell. And I would say that if you sell that meat is murder as a principle today, it becomes much harder to convince people who are never going to move off meat to move on to the alternative. So of meat which is grown in labs. Thank you.
Can we take 2 more questions? There's just the lady at the back. Yep.
Well, earlier I kind of got the impression that the fact that killing the animal was part of it, in the sense that you, the guy in the pink shirt, was saying how it's kind of like a assertion of human superiority. And I wonder how you would feel about lab-grown meat, knowing that it's not asserting that authority anymore. Is that putting animals equal to humans? And how do you feel about that? Because I don't think lab-grown meat would satisfy all meat eaters, because, as you were saying before, it's the fact that you seem to want to feel superior to animals.
This is more a question for you than it is for me.
Shall I? Am I right?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, sure. So a few things there. The first, with regards to human superiority in that point, it's less a want to feel superior. It's more, I would argue, a social necessity, purely due to the implications that arise when we start judging animals to be completely equal. I mean, as I said, if we want to have a logically coherent society, we would have to grant them rights, which, with the example of a baby, shows we just can't feasibly do. So it's less about want. And with regards to lab-grown meat, I much prefer the real thing myself. I've never had lab-grown meat. So the way that sort of satisfies the whole superiority discussion, I'm slightly confused to thrust the question there. But what I would say is that to declare it as murder, taking into account the points about lab-grown meat, is effectively not only a baseless rejection of meat if you do have hope for lab-grown meat in the future, as has been said, but also, linking back to the earlier point, quite a dangerous approach to take if we are to have a society in which humans can flourish and animals can be treated as separate beings but with their own rights in turn.
Okay, we'll have one more question and then we'll move on to Joey. The gentleman in the hat.
Back to the gentleman on my far right. Are you not asking us to answer 2 questions in one vote taking? There's a question of whether animal-based meat is murder versus cell-cultured-based meat.
I mean, the question.
Very different.
Yeah. I think if the debate was is animal meat murder, I wouldn't be on this side of the argument, right? I'm just saying let's not sell the principle, because this question has to include both. It has to include the potential for a future when as this technology takes off and becomes more mainstream, people are able to eat more widely available a meat that clearly isn't murderous. So I think that's a really good point. What I would say is don't go out of this room and don't vote against the principle of meat. Cast your vote against the current state of the meat industry and its abominable practices. So they are 2 different questions. No, it wouldn't. Because it would mean, because if you do that, you vote that meat is murder. You would be cutting off an option which allows the future of meat to be separate from murder.
No, because I'm voting that animal-based meat is murder.
But that's not the question in front of us, is it?
Sorry, can I just ask or say one?
Okay, well, I've one more question, and then we have to move on after that.
I mean, there was a distinction with oat milk and plant-based milks not to be called milks and cheeses and yogurts, because the dairy industry in the US and Europe said milk has to come from an animal. And I have a feeling that you're optimistic that cellular-based lab meat will have the same right because it comes from animal genes, but you don't know. The industry may say, they may see it as a threat to their market and their industry and want it differentiated and then class it not as meat. So I think you are... it could be classed.
Okay, let's see what the future holds and what classifications fall into place as the tech grows. But at the moment, lab-grown meat is meat. It occupies the exact same cellular structure. It has been able to replicate tastes. It has exactly the same resting principles. What differentiates it is cost and production.
And lack of consciousness.
Yes, and lack of consciousness, which is exactly why you should vote that meat isn't murder, because it's that key separating degree. This is a meat which results in people, in beings not being murdered. So doesn't that prove the point?
Okay, we're going to have to move on. And finally, I'd like to introduce our fourth speaker, Joey Carbstrong, vegan activist. We give him a round of applause, please. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your interesting positions and ideas. So the first thing we've got to get off the table is the word murder, because really this is a play on words, isn't it? Like, the word murder bears weight, and Will over here said that the most used definition, but not the only definition, is the unlawful premeditated killing of one human by another. Don't you worry, I hear it all the time. Probably hear it 5 times a week by people defending their meat eating. But that's not the only definition. So if you're going to go into the dictionary to use definitions of words, there are many non-anthropocentric definitions of the word murder. So, Collins Dictionary has to kill brutally, to kill inhumanely or barbarously, and we can't deny that robbing someone of their sentience can never be humane. I mean, unless they are suffering, or, we make them suffer, and then we rob them of their sentience, or we keep them in these happy farms, and then we rob them of their sentience. So, I think that fits perfectly what we do to animals. Merriam-Webster Dictionary, to slaughter wantonly. So these definitions are all up there online. These all apply to animals. So just based on semantics alone, based on the definition alone, meat is murder. Meat, a product of murder. Now, I get into these semantics battles a lot. Is artificially inseminating a cow rape? Is, subjugating sentient animals slavery? Is shooting an animal in the head without moral justification murder? I don't think there's a significant moral difference between animals and human beings. Now you might say, well, that justifies us, killing them against their will for an unnecessary reason and an unjustified reason. So you might say, well, we are superior. We're obviously more intelligent. Animals don't have iPhones, and I'm like, they can't vote in court, but so can't certain humans. Certain humans are born with what? A mental disability. Do we treat them in a way that breaches their right? Of course we don't. Of course we don't. Human baby. Now you said, should we assign a human baby rights? Human baby rights. Human babies have fundamental rights protecting them, protecting their liberty, their freedom, protecting them from abuse. You touch a child, where do you go? Prison. Okay, so they have rights, and you say no, we can't equate babies with animals. Well, a pig, higher sentience, higher in intelligence, the 4th most intelligent animal on Earth. Okay, just before chimpanzees. And what's the next one? Well, they're the 4th. Really, really intelligent beings. I mean, you could argue that a human baby, it's just nothing more than, a dribbling, they don't really have much to offer the world. Okay, but we would never rob them of their sentience. We'd never abuse them. They have fundamental rights protecting them. the right to drive a car, get a license, and to vote. I mean, some humans aren't even assigned those rights. I'm talking about fundamental rights of liberty, bodily integrity, the right to live, the right not to be enslaved and subjugated and murdered. Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness. Wow, it was signed right here. Okay. Now, no one's going to argue that animals aren't sentient. I don't think anyone in the scientific community of any merit thinks animals are not sentient. I mean, it's quite obvious that they are. There's someone inside of there, someone with wants, desires, and needs, someone who wants to avoid, pain. They have the desire for well-being. So, what is the difference between us and animals? Where we feel like we're morally justified to, subjugate them, to steal their children from them, to put them inside of gas chambers, rip the flesh off of their bones, stick knives into their throats. What is the difference, the morally significant difference between them? Okay, because we could argue there are humans of, if you believe in sentience hierarchy, lower sentience than animals, contribute less to society than animals could. But we never rob them of their rights. So I think legality and morality get conflated and mixed up and confused. What's legal isn't always moral. I mean, just look 200 years in the past to see that slavery was once legal. It wasn't moral. And I would argue that there is no morally significant difference between us and animals that justifies killing them. And for that reason, I think to murder a human is just as morally unjustified as murdering an animal. Okay? And I think we should assign animals rights. Just basic rights. The right not to be treated, I just asked for one right. The right not to be treated as property, as someone else's, as a product. Okay? That's what I would assign them. You don't have to give them a license and stuff like that. I understand that. So, there's also a crime by law called murder by proxy. It's not where you with a knife kill the animal yourself, or you with a knife kill a human yourself. You assign others to do the job for you. Murder by proxy. Charles Manson, famous serial killer, was charged with murder by proxy. He got life in prison. Okay? When we purchase animal products, it's not us putting the knife in the animal's throat, but it's murder by proxy, second-hand murder. So I feel like you didn't really answer the question, Will, about what is the difference between animals and humans that justifies a knife in the animal's throat, but moral treatment of human beings. And I'm happy to bang out what that difference is, and we can apply that in the animal context and see if it justifies stabbing them. But also, you threw us a curveball, Patrick, with the cultured meat idea. I think we focus on the 3 trillion animals that are murdered annually for flesh, and not the 3 companies that are bringing out prototypes for cultured meat when we have thousands of plant-based options already. But we could also argue that the meat inside a coconut is also meat, and that's not murder too. But I think for the benefit of this debate, meat is definitely 100% just as murderous as shooting a human child in the head, in my opinion. And that's it.
Okay, I'm going to just open up the floor specifically for Joey's speech, and then we'll open up the floor more widely. So, Lauren.
With pets, we're in a bit of a pickle with domestication. Domestication is a problem that human beings created. Okay, we created that problem, and you know what the alternative is to rescuing those animals, which it's the most vegan thing we can do, is rescue animals from shelters. They get a needle in the arm and they go, they get killed, they get euthanized, or sometimes they're gas chambered. So the most moral thing for us to do is to control them from breeding, so we have less of this problem, and rescue them from shelters without otherwise be killed. Okay, we can't let animals free, domesticated animals free in society, because they get collected by the RSPCA and taken to a shelter, and if they're not, rescued by someone, they're killed. So we have no option with that. But is meat murder? Yes. Is the flesh of a dog murder? Yes.
Just sort of building on what I last asked, just so we're 100% sure of what we're dealing with here. And it's a very simple yes/no question. Would you feel the same way about killing a baby as you would a chicken? Just sort of binary yes/no.
Would I feel the same way?
As in, if you had to kill a chicken and a human
My
baby,
feelings on
just
killing.
yes or no, would you feel the same way about?
Well, my feelings on killing. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes, but my feelings on.
Right.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
But my feelings on killing a human baby and a chicken have got nothing to do with the morality of it.
So you kill a baby as easily as
so,
you would a
but
chicken.
my feelings on the topic have got nothing to do with it.
Okay. Noted.
So.
Yeah. No, fair enough. But yeah, we got it.
Well,
No,
I can throw that back at you.
It's all right.
Okay. Yeah.
So for you as well, the same that you asked him.
Yeah.
So if you know about the atrocities of the animal agriculture, you
Yeah.
say yourself that you still prefer the real thing, as you said,
Yeah.
cancer. So knowing how badly the animals are treated, knowing that the animals suffer when they die, knowing the environmental impact on it, what is your justification for carrying on doing it?
Well, I think that's a separate question to the idea of meat as murder, because as I said before. I mean, no, fair enough, because actually, before this evening, I honestly didn't think that there were people who could say I could kill a human infant child as easy as I could a chicken. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong.
That's a straw man.
I remind people that it's Q&A, please.
So no, sorry, I obviously misheard it. But I mean, the point is that there is a qualitative difference, quite frankly, and that actually humans, I think, as we can all see, and I would say probably intuitively feel, have a certain level of sentient complexity which is above and beyond.
Not all humans. Not all humans, though.
Sorry, please, can
Q&A,
to be clear, this is Joey's Q&A, so ask him questions. You'll have more chance to argue with him.
Yes, no, come back to me.
Don't worry.
So we'll take 2 more questions directly for Joey, and then we'll open up the floor more generally. So, yeah, just the hand there, I can't see. Just here.
A controlling of animals breeding. The thing, if we would not hold a double standard if there was a problem like that for human beings, okay? So if there was a problem that was uncontrollable, like what's happening to domesticated animals, what's the alternative? The alternative to not controlling their breeding is they get murdered in a shelter. So this is the most vegan option we have. But is meat murder? Yes. So I feel like this isn't even on topic, but it's fine. We can go out into this moral grey area. But for me and other vegans, the most vegan and moral thing we can do is rescue these animals and control their breeding. Otherwise, what do we do if we just lead them to the devices and let them breed more puppies into existence? There's more numbers, and guess what? More pigs, more dogs, pigs, cows. They're all the same to me, you see. No speciesism here. More dogs are going to get killed in gas chambers, and yeah. But is dog meat murder? Yes. Is cow meat murder? Yes. Is pig meat murder? Yes. Also, there are differences between humans and animals, okay? There are, but what is the difference that justifies us stabbing cows in the throat and not human beings? What is the morally significant difference? Yes, there's differences in sentience. You know, maybe this elephant's more sentient than a mouse, okay? But does that mean we should, walk up to a mouse and step on them, kill them? What is the difference that morally justifies us stabbing cows, but not an infant child, but not some human being of lower sentience or intelligence, which there are plenty of them. We treat them morally and we assign them rights. What is the difference? It's a double standard.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question and then we'll open it up fully. So, any new hands? Okay, we'll go Joe at the back.
I feel like my point is almost kind of rather has a small scope compared to all these grand moral arguments, but to me at least, in my kind of semantic and syntactic interpretation of the phrase meat is murder seems to be one on principle, wherein if any instance of meat falls into the set of things which are murder. So I would actually make very, very, very significant moral points and arguments which are far more sophisticated than the one that I'm positing. But it would just be that what you've established there seems to be that animal meat is murder, which is, is a totally sensible premise, but that's not the same as saying that all meat on principle is murder, which is, I think, Patrick gave an example wherein something falls into the category of meat, but not as murder. And I think that in this scenario, though I think you haven't said anything wrong at all. I'd say that it doesn't, for me at least, and you might have a different interpretation of what emotion is, it doesn't prove the principle of murder. It proves the principle that killing an animal.
Yes, exactly.
Joe, would you like?
Can you repeat that question? Where does the word meat originate from? And I think look, we've got plant-based meat alternatives too that you could call meat, and we call the plant-based alternatives chicken. But are they directly murdering a chicken? No, but like coconut meat, is that murder? No. And cultured meat, if they don't exploit an animal, they might take a cell and create an infinite amount of chicken flesh and didn't murder anyone in the process. Is that murder? No. I'm not going to argue that is murder. But I think for the 3 trillion animals that are stabbed and have the flesh ripped off their bones, that meat, the 3 trillion a year, a conservative estimate, 2.7 million trillion marine animals, and yes, my friend.
Can we take... Sorry, should we take 2 votes at the end of this then?
Yeah.
Is meat murder the topic that was actually placed before? And then is animal meat murder, which is exactly what you have argued and everyone in this room probably agrees with. Should we take 2 votes?
No, I was... I think, well, at least I think we all went into this debate saying it is meat, as we commonly understand it, murder. So,
yeah. It's a bit of a curveball.
However we want to take it, I'll leave it to the powers that be, but...
No, I'm just making this fun. I guess it's semantic. Obviously, we're going to take 1 vote, but they are 2 very different topics, aren't they?
Well, we could say, is milk exploitation of a cow? And you could say, well, what about coconut milk? What about oat milk? And the debate's finished. I mean, okay, so clever, but yeah.
Gentleman at the back. Sorry, just to interrupt you. Could you say who you are directing the question to, if you are directing the question to? If you are directing a question to someone.
You've got 1 question because we've got a lot of people to get through.
The reason that no one's actually eaten from meat is because you're not legally allowed to call it meat, and it's not actually legally available commercially because it's not meat, it's something else. That's not a question, that's a statement. My general question is more of a redefining of what the actual definition of murder is. You mentioned, would you feel different killing a chicken or an infant? Then you can add, would you feel different killing an infant or an old person? There is a difference. However, I am on the side that there is a very big difference between killing an animal and killing a person. And you keep asking for the difference, and in my opinion, it is written on your t-shirt. The one thing that I don't believe animals can do is hope. And when you kill an infant,
evidence.
kill its potential for life.
Where is your evidence of that animals can't hope or desire or want or avoid pain and suffering? And
Well, avoiding pain is something that plants do. It's a natural
well, we do.
Hope is not like love. Hope is a complex emotion that requires something more thought out. And personally,
Well,
that's what I believe qualifies.
Well, I don't know. If they're suffering in a gestation crate, I think they would hope they would be released soon. If you harm an animal for long enough and they're suffering, and then you release them out into a green field and let them free, and then you bring them back into harm, I think they would hope to be out in that green field soon. What you're saying is they don't have any memory, they don't have any desires. I think science is on the side of the complexity of animals' emotional range and their intelligence. I mean, going up against science there, brother.
Sorry, we have more questions to get through. Who's next?
Okay.
Exactly.
Right, we'll go for the gentleman there in the yellow shirt there.
Hello, guy in a pink shirt. How would you feel if an alien species came along with a higher sentience than us and more intelligent, more evolved, and farmed your mum, you?
To be fair, generally, when people call my mum a cow, it's in a less roundabout way, but fair enough.
It's not an insult. Cows are beautiful.
Well, I mean, obviously, in virtue of being a human and knowing my capacity for sentience and knowing the complex levels of emotions that we as humans feel, I would have a definite and set series of emotions about it. But I think, which I believe this is what you're trying to do, to analogize that then to animals, I don't think is quite right, because we've heard Joey say, oh, animals can do this, that, and the other. They can hope, they can experience love and all this sort of thing, which I'm not going to deny outright, because I obviously don't know the science as well as you. But I think that there is uncertain ground there. I think that to completely anthropomorphize the feelings of animals, which is what any discussion of animal feeling is at the end of the day, is, as I said, shaky ground, and so to try and analogize in that way just isn't quite accurate. But if anything, it's a testament actually to human.
Sorry again. Question and answer. We have way more people to get through. Yeah. Who's next?
Okay, we'll go for a gentleman here at the front.
My question's for Will. When Patrick was talking and he was describing the lab meat versus meat from an animal, he said that there is no trait difference except sentience. You turned around and said, I'd still prefer the animal meat. Why would that be when the only trait difference is sentience?
Well, admittedly, I mean, I think Patrick knows more about lab-grown meat than I do. I mean, it was more an off-the-cuff mark with regards to taste.
The taste is the same. There's no trait difference.
Well, maybe that's the case, and in that case, then well, fantastic. If we can cut down the carbon footprint, then brilliant. Maybe we should welcome lab-grown meats, but I have no experience of them, and just from personal experience, I would say I'd go for the.
Do you mind if I come in for a moment?
Yeah.
So
he'd go for the murder.
Yeah, exactly.
He'd prefer to go for the murder.
So let's take the total number of meat eaters in this world, right? You're going to have some, the kind that go fox hunting, who are never going to convert, right? Yeah. But there is a group of people who probably want to be vegetarians, but like the taste, and there's probably a tradition there. They grew up meat eaters. And so I'd say that the market of people can potentially be moved to lab-grown meat as the product becomes far more refined and more than 3 companies start making. There was a time when there were only 3 companies making computers. That will convert. You will have a bunch of people who will forever. The same reason that some people still hunt elephants and poach tigers now for completely horrendous reasons. But I think that it does open a future for a world where meat remains on the menu, but non-murderous.
Okay, we'll go for Louise here.
I think my question's more for the vegans, because I kind of understood that you were both vegans, but if you based on meat, and I don't think that people who don't eat meat are necessarily vegans, because some eat, for example, eggs or honey or milk. But for example, if there are chickens in a field and you come across an egg, because they lay eggs, you don't need to inseminate them. If you eat that egg, is that murder?
Murder? Of course it's not. If you come across an egg in a field, there's no sentience in the egg. Murder is to rob someone of their sentience, to rob someone of their life. There's no life in a dropped egg. That's like asking if eating a piece of animal feces is murder. I mean,
so if you but the animal, you can have it yourself. You find it dead.
I think using animals as products is inherently immoral. Yeah, that's the problem. Animals are viewed as property, as resources, as egg-laying machines. As are slaves, essentially. They're not looked at as like you so graciously display. They're not looked at like anything more than to step on your boot and use as flesh. I mean, shoot them in the head, treat them like nothing. They can't even be considered murdered. They can't be considered raped. They're not even considered at all. And I think this is a huge problem. They're like, I mean, when you see a chicken, what do you see? An egg-laying machine? Someone to walk, like, do you see a bird? Do you see an individual? Do you see an intelligent individual that is sentient and, they look after their young? They want to live just like, other animals do? They probably want to live just as much as a baby does. I mean, there's traits of intelligence in animals that supersede traits of intelligence in human babies. Like newly hatched chicks. They can recognize their siblings upon hatching. Something that a human baby can't do. I mean, they display something called object permanence, where if you cover up an object to a baby chick, okay, they know that object still exists, even if you cover it up. But a human baby thinks it's disappeared. That's why you can play peekaboo with them. Okay, so they display greater intelligence than human babies. Do they have more moral value then? Or do we have different traits of intelligence and that doesn't determine moral value? Okay, this is a problem.
Okay. We'll go for a gentleman here at the front.
This question's for the meat is murder side. I would assume they're against, for example, sweets that contain gelatin. would they also, so they would consider like sweets containing gelatin to be murder?
Who you're addressing? They? Is it vegans?
Yeah.
Okay.
The meat is
Yeah, okay.
murder.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you also extend to say organic is murder because organic is fertilized with manure from the animal agriculture?
So you would say, what was the gelatin part first? And then we'll go into the manure part.
Would I be right to assume you'd say sweets?
That gelatin is murder? Murder by proxy, meaning if you are funding animal agriculture with gelatin, okay, if you are subsidizing their costs, if you're making their costs cheaper and you are funding them, okay, then you are funding a murderous industry.
Okay. And the add-on to that was, would you, by the same reasoning, say that organic vegetables are murder because they use manure?
I would say that there's a full-on complex topic, okay, but we have to, it is so complex because there's different ways they acquire the manure in different countries. But I will say this: if organic producers are purchasing huge amounts of blood, bone, organic, fecal matter off of industry, and it's subsidizing their costs, and like they would otherwise have to pay to dump all of this byproduct. It's not actually a byproduct. If you are paying for the product, it then becomes a product. I think that this is a big issue that needs addressing. Secondary to stabbing cows in the neck for burgers. Okay, but it is still an issue. Now, I think steering towards more synthetic, we have technology now. You know, we can steer towards synthetic fertilizers that don't harm the environment and that don't help to subsidize animal agriculture. This is secondary to sticking your fist in a cow's anus to inseminate them for dairy and then slashing their child's throat open and eating their body parts. But I do think it is a moral issue that needs addressing. Sorry for the graphic description. just explaining objective reality for animals.
Well, so are you against animal cruelty?
I'm against animal cruelty insofar as we are able to effectively retain a healthy position of animals in society, as I have earlier defined. Because if we, sorry, Ash, I'll let you. Yeah, go on. Let's go.
Would you agree that animal cruelty is causing an animal unnecessary harm or suffering?
Well, I mean, animal cruelty, obviously, it's unlike murder. There's no one set term bit and it's set definition for it. So you say unnecessary harm and suffering, but equally, to ask me to make a judgment about it, I mean, what is in your mind unnecessary harm and suffering? Because we may have different interpretations of it.
If I didn't need it for my health, to live a healthy and thriving life.
Okay.
You need to eat meat to be healthy.
Yeah.
And if you agree that you don't need it to be healthy, then are you not guilty of causing?
I would say unjustified. I would say unjustified, not unnecessary. Unnecessary is very ambiguous. Unjustified. Now, to oppose animal cruelty, right, but to openly pay for, fund, consume animal cruelty is a complete contradiction of your own moral system. And to say that, animals aren't even on the same playing field as us, we can use them, subjugate them and stab them in the throat and it's not even murder, but to be against animal cruelty for some reason, they must have some moral value to you to be opposed to treating them cruelly. Now, whether that's there's a sentient being in there who avoids pain and suffering and wants to experience well-being, so somewhere deep inside of you know that they have moral value, but for some reason you contradict your own moral stance against that.
I mean, once again, I think it's a big issue of anthropomorphizing the issue, because you talk about cruelty, and you're saying cruelty with regards to animals in the same way we have cruelty with regards to humans. And I would say, okay, let's say we define cruelty as unnecessary suffering. I would say, yep, sure, I oppose it in the context of my other views as to how we should and indeed have a right to use animals. So of course, if we, as a meat eater who supports the production of meat and the consumption of meat, I would fully support a ethical and sort of righteous use of animals that's not cause grievous harm.
Righteous. Define righteous.
Sorry, we have a million more questions to get through.
Well, let's open up. Let's discuss this. What do you mean by righteous killing of animals?
We'll come on to it.
Lady there who's had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, sorry. So will you kind of animals, they would somehow rise to be more powerful than us in society, and that there's some sort of need to retain our status by killing them. And if we didn't kill them, there would be some sort of role reversal or anarchy, and all the cows would start taking our jobs.
Is that a straw man of your position, or is that your position?
Carnival's Daily Mail is what that is, but no, not at all. I mean, my point was, and we're going back to the original motion because obviously we've strayed at certain times quite far from it, is that if we are to, and what I've said, and I'll say it again, if we are to say that meat is murder, we have to afford animals equal status to humans, and if we afford animals equal status to humans, that's a very dangerous
I think
position.
you used the word radical equality, like exactly equal to humans in every way. Like, no, we're just asking for fundamental rights. Like, one right, to be treated as a free being, as in, look,
so can we
not as a slave, not as property belonging to someone else.
So is hunting all right, like sort of stalking in the wild? Because if they're no one's
hunting
property,
is murder.
No, I know they're free, but
No,
so
no,
I believe
no,
earlier
I'll
you
go
said,
far to say is hunting is murder.
Sure, earlier you said the one fundamental right not to be treated as property. So surely if we abide by that definition,
You're using them for your those
no, but
animals
going back
that
to what you said originally, forget this. One fundamental right, so I can hunt animals. Does that
not be treated as property? Yeah, you can't hunt. No, you can't hunt animals. That's murder. But if you afford animals rights to protect them, okay, you afforded them a right to liberty, okay, bodily integrity. So if you shoot them,
big game hunting.
I think that we should have laws that protect animals from being killed, like we do for human beings.
Right, but as we've established, that requires a certain equality.
But not radical, not exact equality in every single way, shape and form.
You don't want exact
because you don't
equality
afford that
in
to babies either, human babies. You don't say, okay, let's get human babies up in Parliament to vote and give them a driver's license and that's what that's the extremes you're going to.
But they've got
animals.
fundamental rights, as you said earlier. I mean, you're contradicting your own position here.
No. Fundamental and not like the right to vote are two different things.
No, but obviously you can say it's reductionist, but that's the kind of logic you're working on, and that logic simply doesn't add up.
Like we do with.
It's okay. Well, I'll.
No, well that's good. We're chatting this through. I think hunting an animal without justification is murder. And I think if they had laws protecting him, they'd have laws protecting him from people like you that want to kill them.
But that's development on your idea of they only need one.
No, that's all they need. Like just a law protecting them, their bodily integrity, just the right to not be used as a product, treated as property, murdered. Like we have these rights protecting us, human rights. Not all humans are like radically equal either.
There's a radical equality of species. As in you've got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, key word. But
human supremacist rights, where we demand rights ourselves, but we take those rights away from animals, like complete double standard.
Because we're different. Okay.
And I'd just like to. This is a Q&A, guys. So we have to move on.
Sorry.
This is what it's all about, dude.
Kevin.
I'd like to present Joey with a purely hypothetical scenario. I'm not going to try and speculate as to how realistic this may or may not be.
Okay.
But if you imagine yourself in a survival situation where your only form of
hypothetical
was a piece of roadkill, so you had no sort of plants nearby.
Well,
Sorry, I'm not finished. But
okay.
On the one hand, so you're not actively making the choice, in the very fullest sense, to eat this because it's your only way to survive. And secondly, it's not been intentionally killed.
Yeah.
If it's roadkill, would you still consider this murder by proxy?
Of course not. You're not paying anyone to stab someone in the throat. Someone's been killed accidentally. If that was a human being's arm on the floor there and that was the only thing I had to eat, I'd probably eat it too. I didn't murder by proxy them. There was just someone accidentally got... There's a difference between premeditated murder, okay, paying someone to assassinate someone for you on your behalf, and finding someone who's been accidentally run over and eating their body when you're about to die. I mean, where's the moral... roadkill... That's the moral loophole. Eat roadkill. They don't like you can eat. So I personally think that unless you were about to die, it would still be disrespectful. Like, why not just treat them like someone who has died, move them off the side of the road, maybe bury them, see if they're still alive, put some leaves over them, like you would. And if it was a human being, you'd call the police and say, oh my God, a human being's been run over. Unless you were starving, you'd probably eat their thigh first and.
Right, we'll have to take another question.
This is for you. So if you think it's okay to kill animals because they have a lack of emotional capability, would you be okay with eating your own dog?
Well, if I'm going to be logically consistent, yes.
And would you feel the same way? Would you feel the same way?
Well, look, I'm all about logical consistency. Fair enough. If I'm going to argue that consumption of animal products is fine, then yes, I do also have to say that I would eat my own dog. Now, but the beauty of free society is that I don't have to if I don't want to. So I probably wouldn't eat my dog.
You don't have to eat meat if you don't want to.
Yeah.
No, exactly. Great. Well, as I said before.
Okay, let's go into logical consistency. But you wouldn't eat a human being.
No, because they are, as we've established, different to, and I would argue.
What is that difference?
Well, the difference,
you haven't spelled it out yet.
Yeah, because it comes down to intuitive morality, and if you're able to give me sort of an expounding in, I don't know, under 2 minutes.
Intuitive morality? Meaning just out of your intuition you don't want to?
Yeah, for the same reason that I think the majority of the world would probably have more of an issue killing a human baby than a chicken. It's that sort of intuitive morality.
What is the moral difference?
Okay,
you haven't spelled out. That's your own intuitive morality. What is the difference? That's not being logically consistent, right there.
Yeah.
Because you would eat your dog, but you wouldn't eat a human from some moral intuition. You know, my moral intuition says it's bad to stab cows in the throat for a burger, but in the eyes of a cow and a human child, I think that they're both on a similar degree of sentience and intelligence. And what is the moral? You haven't even spelt out a difference. And this is where it ends, the difference.
Right, we'll take 2 more questions and then we'll have a final vote on the proposition. Okay. So, gentleman at the back, please.
Are animals hunting other animals murder?
Moral agency. Moral agency. Human beings possess moral agency. Okay, animals in the wild do not.
Sorry, yeah. And then humans originally hunted other animals for their food.
We hunted each other and killed and ate each other too.
So
is that moral? Well, we hunted each other and ate each other too. Cannibalism in tribes, is that moral? That's murder.
But if it's for survival, so you yourself would die.
Well, if me and you were on a desert island, I wouldn't murder you to survive either. I'd try to see who died first. And I'm vegan, so I'd live longer.
Right, we'll take one final question and then we'll move to voting. Go on, Sam.
Coming back to that argument, as we talked about keeping domestic animals and whatever, would you be comfortable serving any of your pets, for example, like a dog or an animal who needed meat, or would you just see who died first, or try and find some other way?
Well, dogs can be super healthy on a plant-based diet that's formulated. There's a peer-reviewed study on that. Sorry? That you can formulate, this is what, there's no magical property in meat that you can't synthesize. Cats need taurine, they need protein, they need to be monitored. Okay, you don't need to stab other animals in the throat. And people go, oh, well, the cats have this, they have a natural diet. Cats aren't naturally occurring animals. They're human, selectively bred, man-made, domesticated animals. Why should we stab a cow in the throat to feed a cat, a house cat? And when is a cat going to go into the ocean and drag a tuna out? You know what I mean? Based on environmental destruction, not even morality, based on environmental destruction alone, meat is destroying the environment. The number one cause of Amazon deforestation, ocean dead zones, water use, land use, and you think your cat has that much moral value that they can contribute to the destruction of the earth? Or if there's peer-reviewed studies and thousands of anecdotes of healthy plant-based cats, wouldn't we choose the formulated pet food for that cat? And you're not a cat. Do you eat steak? Do you eat steak? Where's your moral justification? We talk about your cat later. Meat is murder.
That's it now for questions. Before we get on to the final vote, I'd just like to thank everyone for contributing. Despite different arguments everyone's put forward, their ideas really well, and it's been a civilised debate. So I think a round of applause is in need.
Well done. And well done to Will for coming, and I know well done for standing up against, because you had a lot of people challenging you, and you did very well.
Discussion. It's good.
Yeah.
It's enjoyable.
Now we'll move to the final vote. So we'll start with the original proposition, which is meat is murder. So for those in favour of the proposition, please raise your hand. Okay, that's remained similar. And for those who oppose the proposition, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Okay. And for those who abstain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there have been fewer abstentions by 2 and 3 fewer for the opposition. So that means there's been a swing further in favour of the motion, which is meat is murder. And then, as Patrick suggested, I think we should vote on the proposition animal meat.
No, there's no need to do that unless you want to, right? Do you want to do the difference? Animal meat is murder versus just meat is murder?
Coconut meat or cultured meat or plant-based meat? What about Beyond Burgers?
I advise instead that we give everyone a round of applause for coming. Thank you. You're the people who make these events a success. And I also recommend you get yourself a glass of vegan wine at the
Excellent!
back.
Woo! Let's have a party!
And enjoy yourselves. Thank you everyone so much for coming.
Really well done, man. That was really good. I really enjoyed myself.
Well,
there.
Chaz. Thank you for having me.
First time sharing, so.
Excellent. No, you did a good job.
Well done.